His country is smaller than the state of Vermont. It is sandwiched between two unfriendly powers. 18 years ago, it was inhospitable, largely barren, and referred to as a wilderness. Today, it grows tomatoes in the desert, operates 2 nuclear reactors, and is affluent enough to participate in a comprehensive redevelopment plan in Latin America. Returning from his visit to South America, Israeli President Zalman Shazar is given a warm welcome at the White House. For the President of the United States, the month of August begins on an international note, with an expression of friendship that will strengthen the ties between America and her friend on the Mediterranean. Before the month is over, the President's interests will largely be domestic ones, as the American people show concern about an ever-expanding economy. However, for the moment, the public interest was focused on a young man from Waukegan, Illinois. On the 6th of August, Pat Nugent would become the President's son-in-law in one of the most publicized weddings of the century. For the chroniclers of White House history, it was the first time a president attended a professional football game. The day was a perfect one for a wedding, and through the electronic eyes of the network cameras, millions of Americans witnessed the arrival of Luci Baines Johnson, the 7th daughter of a president to become a White House bride. The shrine of the Immaculate Conception provided the setting for the nuptial mass. For Luci, now Mrs. Patrick Nugent, the whirlwind summer in the national spotlight is over. She will quietly head back to school and assume a new role as a campus housewife while Pat finishes his education. And the father of the bride will also slip quietly back into his role as President of the United States. They had agreed in February, during the Honolulu conference, to meet as often as possible to discuss developments in Vietnam. On 13 August, the first opportunity arose. General Westmoreland had been attending formal conferences with CINCPAC in Honolulu. The President asked the General to meet him at the ranch for the weekend to discuss the overall situation in detail. The meeting was unheralded, and the visit was not announced until the morning after the General arrived. Since the chief executive put the Pedernales River on the map, there is very little that surprises the residents of the Texas Hill Country. And the presence of the most publicized soldier of the decade attending a simple country church service with his president is something the Hill people take in their daily stride. Immediately following the church services, the reporters were invited to the ranch for a press conference. During their informal talk throughout the early morning hours, the general found the president exhaustive in his quest for details on the many facets of the war. They had explored thoroughly over 36 subjects pertaining to the fighting in Southeast Asia. Before the president introduced General Westmoreland to the press, he let one of his perennial favorites have the floor. For most of the press conference, the president turned the podium over to his guest. In addition to commenting upon troop levels and the war in general, he indicated high prospects of a successful election in Vietnam in September. The Viet Cong, he cautioned, will do all in their powers to disrupt the democratic process, but the Vietnamese armed forces, he promised, will provide security for the voters. Free elections and a self-determined government was one of the basic requirements essential to stability in Southeast Asia, and a key point in the president's speech to the Alumni Council a month earlier. Captain Bill Carpenter, recommended for the Medal of Honor and a hero of Vietnam in his own right, accompanied General Westmoreland during the weekend briefing session with the president. Carpenter's record, added to the record of over 290,000 other fighting men in Vietnam, confirmed the president's conviction that the United States had a superb force in Vietnam.
General Westmoreland, I want you to take back with you my personal message to all of our men in Vietnam. And that message is this: you are our best. You make every American proud.
When the president is home, the ranch often becomes a major crossroad, a stopping point for prime ministers, generals, and sometimes just interesting people who want to see the chief executive. The Austin Aquanauts were among the latter, and for an hour or two, the scenery around the ranch somehow was not the same. The president assured his family and friends that the Austin Aquanauts were not part of his administration's beautification program. However, after elections, who knows? Lyndon Johnson came to Washington 35 years ago, grateful for the opportunity to serve as an administrative assistant to a Texas congressman. It was a time when few opportunities were afforded young people to gain practical experience in the workings of government. On August 18th, the president saw proof that the picture had changed. 14,000 young Americans serving as interns in a variety of government agencies would soon leave Washington, taking home with them new insights and a new appreciation for both the problems and the potential of their federal machinery. Some of that federal machinery began turning as the students bore witness to the president's remarks on the draft. A presidential advisory commission had begun its work on a program that would call for a fairer system for selecting the nation's youth for service in the armed forces. In addition, the commission would examine certain non-military alternatives to the draft, such as the Peace Corps, the Teacher Corps. Next year, the president would seek a program to help all those who wanted to train for public service. The chief executive was determined that his term in office would mean a greater role for young people. At the same time, he cautioned it would mean a greater responsibility as well. Overhauling the draft and creating new opportunities for the young were only samples of the Johnson administration's programs for a greater society. On the following day, the 19th of August, he swung north in an exhaustive 3-day effort to define these programs to the constituency of 5 New England states. Never before in the history of the nation had a president and his Congress worked together so well to serve the domestic needs of the people. For the people of Buffalo, their needs lay in the polluted waters of Lake Erie. Lake Erie is only one body of water across the land that is in trouble. But the cleanup will start here with the installation of a new filtering system made possible by the Water Quality Act of 1965.
Like so many of our problems, the pollution of Lake Erie is a result of our abundance. It has been caused by the great industrial might of Buffalo and Cleveland and Toledo and a dozen other cities. And this is what we see in America today. A powerful drive to clean up the very problems that our progress has created. So much of American ugliness and impurity, so much of the contradictions of American life are caused by just this: the eager and aggressive spirit by which we tame this continent of ours.
Continuing through New York State, the presidential party touched down in Syracuse. Here, the domestic theme turned to an issue that has historically plagued every country in the world: the plight of the city. The crowd that greeted him was jubilant, but when the enthusiasm subsided, the president's words were solemn ones. He cautioned those who would profit from slums and poverty, who would line their pockets with the tattered dollars of the poor. The Demonstration Cities Bill, passed by the Senate only hours earlier, would go a long way toward taking the profit out of poverty. On the road to Ellenville, through the Catskills at twilight, the president took satisfaction in this Senate victory. For this bill was the most sweeping proposal ever made by any president to meet the needs of its neediest citizens. At Ellenville, New York, the president concluded his first day on the road with a dedication of a new community hospital. With the hospital serving as a keynote, he spoke of the war on disease, of competent, modern medical care for everyone, regardless of age, and reviewed for a moment the success of Medicare. The president emphasized that good medical care is the right of every American citizen. Under the Medicare program, there is no back door for second-class patients. There is only one waiting room, and that room is open to all. To the doubters, to those who predicted chaos in the hospitals, the president extended an invitation to fill out their Medicare cards and share in the success of the program. Until now, the president had spoken of what his administration was seeking to do and had done for the people. But the benefits and rewards of the Great Society are not a one-way program. Personal responsibility is forever bound to personal rights. At the University of Rhode Island, the president accepted an honorary degree and, with civil responsibility as a keynote, spoke some frank words on the subject.
The Molotov cocktail destroys far more than the police car or the pawn shop. It destroys the basis for civil peace and the basis for social progress. The poor suffer twice at the rider's hands. First, when his destructive fury scars their neighborhoods, and second, when the atmosphere of accommodation and consent is changed to one of hostility and resentment.
The president had once remarked that every office holder should get out and remind himself where the power is in this country. However, the president's hands, already sensitive from 2 days of pressing the flesh, needed no reminding. Manchester for the second time, and to the nation for the 38th time, the president spoke of Vietnam, counseling restraint and outlining the United States' objectives in Southeast Asia. Minutes later, he was off again, this time to Burlington, Vermont. The tour was non-political, and the president, whenever the opportunity arose, shared the hustings with the local Democrats and Republicans. George Aiken of Vermont, who helped make the trip possible, was one Republican so honored. The president joined in the singing in recognition of the senior senator's 74th birthday. The subject was natural conservation, preserving the land, the lakes, the shore in their primeval splendor. For the first time, the president announced, the country is saving more land each year than it loses to the bulldozer and steam shovel. It was late afternoon when Air Force One touched down at Lewiston, Maine. The president, nearing the end of 2 solid days of speech-making, lubricated the machinery in preparation for his final delivery. The place, the John F. Kennedy Memorial Park. The president's remarks were geared to space-age problems, but the setting was reminiscent of an earlier day. The president did not mention the specific alternatives to wage price control, but they were clearly in focus just the same. He counseled self-discipline, fiscal restraint. He spoke of many conferences he had held at the White House with labor and management, urging responsible bargaining, urging decisions that would not trigger inflation. Though many have responded, there were some who had not. If there was no voluntary self-discipline by management and labor, the government would be compelled by sheer necessity to act in order to protect all the people. The president called it a day. He had sold his domestic programs face-to-face to the citizens of 5 states, and at the same time had reminded them of their responsibilities, economic as well as civil. It was the first time since taking the office of president that Lyndon Johnson spent the night on the open sea, and his stateroom for the occasion was aboard the USS Northampton. The cruiser is a seaborne command post, and her myriad electronic communication and control equipment stand ready to serve the chief executive in any national emergency. On Sunday, 21 August, the president departed the Northampton for Campobello Island and discussions with Prime Minister Pearson of Canada. The President applied his own brand of effective personal diplomacy as they informally discussed the world problems that affected both their nations. Later in the day, at the Campobello International Park, the President and the Prime Minister joined forces in the placing of a document box in the cornerstone of a new visitor center. The FDR home may have evoked nostalgic memories for the Chief Executive. For Roosevelt, more than anyone else, left an enduring awareness in Lyndon Johnson of the limits, the powers, and the obligations of the presidency. The obligations, he felt, both to his own people and to the world, were clearly in evidence 6 days later at Arco, Idaho. The site was the Atomic Energy Commission's experimental breeder reactor number 1, the first reactor to produce electricity from nuclear energy. Here, the President spoke of enlarging the prospects for cooperation between the Soviet Union and the United States.
Both of us possess unimaginable power. Our responsibility to the world is heavier than that ever borne by any two nations at any other time in history.
Our purpose, he concluded, is no longer only to avoid nuclear war. It must be a consuming, determined desire to use nuclear energy as a powerful force for peace. It was the day before his 58th birthday, and Lyndon Johnson exhibited the same tireless energy that he brought to Washington 35 years earlier. Repeating his performance of the week before, he swung through the West, selling his programs to the people. There were unexpected rewards awaiting him. At the University of Denver, an honorary degree. In Oklahoma, a Cherokee Indian bonnet. But best of all, at a Colorado airport, a special tribute from Anita Bryant. The month of August was almost over. At the ranch with family and friends, he took the occasion of his birthday to shed for a few moments the mantle of office. He was now Lyndon Baines Johnson, rancher, home in the same hills that had cradled him 58 years ago when he first appeared upon the Texas scene. It was a time to count blessings. The country was at a point that he had envisioned all his life. It had problems, but they were problems of prosperity. If anything concerned him, it was the lack of understanding between people, between nations. You would find very little difference in people's objectives if you could look deep into their hearts and discover what they truly want.